Welcome to Connected, where no topic is off topic. I am your host, Kimberly Dam. Hello, loves. So happy you're joining me here back again. Today, I actually decided that in this episode, I wanted to kind of reflect back on my own, I want to say, experience with my father. Is that sad? It's so sad. It's so sad. But anyway, I felt that this week I kind of wanted to concentrate and just share my experience with my father and basically the lack of having him in my life. The absence, I feel like as we should call it. It's like the chapter that would be in the book, right? Because I just thought this would be a great follow-up episode to the previous episode, which talked about the importance of fathers, not only individually, but societally. So I thought that I would, after that episode, I kind of feel like it would be just nice to kind of dive in, not only for everybody listening, but also for myself, because I always find that when I reflect on past and previous experiences, particularly on the podcast, it's weird. I almost feel like I uncover more like nuggets that I didn't know that were there. And actually, it was funny because just in me brainstorming this episode, I actually kind of came across something that I never really realized before. So I'm just going to dive right in. For those of you that this might be a little bit of a repeat, because I know that I've talked about my relationship with my father in a previous episode. I think I did. I can't really remember. Anyway, I apologize. But again, I'll kind of make it brief. So my father and my mother were only married until I was 2 years old. So they divorced when I was 2, and it was weird because it's even weird now because I forget that I even have a father. Because from the time that I was 2, my dad would take me, he had custody. What was it? The court decided that he would take me every other weekend. And then my mom would have me the rest of the time. And so obviously, I don't have any real trauma around their split because I was 2. I have no recollection of what really happened. There wasn't a lot of fallout that a lot of children experience when their parents split when they're at an older age and they're trying to make sense of it all. I was 2 years old. I couldn't have been happier. But it was kind of weird because what I do remember is I do remember going with my father. The first memories that I probably have of my dad were probably around when I was 4 or 5. I remembered my dad loved taking us to the movies. E.T. was I believe it was my first movie in a theater. And at that time, I think I had a pretty good perception of my father. Just, I thought that he was my dad. And that's all it was. And then as I got older, I felt that there was a little bit, that's when the separation started to occur. It's, I think that it's that more of my personality came out. As I go older, of course, my father was required to discipline me. And so unfortunately, growing up, I would say from the time that I was 4 right up until I was 14, I saw my father every other weekend, and we kind of had fun. I'm going to say kind of because my dad was unfortunately one of those guys that when you started to have fun, it was almost like he had to put a cap on it. I believe a lot of you know what I mean because I think that this is probably somewhat rooted in anxiety. But my dad, he was always he was a comical guy. He was quite humorous, and he was really great at telling stories. Slightly, maybe a little bit of a pathological liar, but he was very entertaining. And he had this way about him that I think kind of drew a lot of people to him. But uh, sadly, I think he was more familiar with the same that I'm familiar with, which is abandonment. And so he had a tendency to push people away. So he kind of had this, like you would start having fun with him, and then he would throw up this wall, and it would completely shock me. It would completely change the game for me because I was young. This was between the ages of 4 and 14. And I just was like, what? I was just having a good time. Like you were having a good time. I thought it was okay for us to be having fun. And you just throw up this wall, and it completely threw me off guard. And, the thing is that I am a naturally joyous, curious, childlike, adventurous, spontaneous person. So that's already in me. That's already part of my, my astrological makeup and part of my personality as being like an Aries and, a manifesting generator going from one thing to the next thing. And it's just literally how the stars designed me and how my parents designed me. And so to be around my dad in that state was very difficult for any period of time. To some extent, I've always wondered if it slightly, in some ways, reminded him of my mom, and that was too painful. And so he had to shut it down. But I saw a lot with my older brother, too. So it was quite difficult. So one thing that I think I learned early on, which I never really, it was actually what I discovered in my brainstorming of this episode, was that I felt that I was too much because like right away there's that cap. And so I think I started to really learn, God, as early as probably like 7. I think I started to learn like around age 7 to really start pulling that back. Whenever I was around my dad, like not only was I on my best behavior because I didn't enjoy being disciplined by him. He yelled. He seemed like really, really stressed. It's like one thing for a parent to like discipline and yell but my dad always seemed really, really stressed by disciplining me. And I hated seeing him like that. He was a smoker, and I swear to God, like he would, yell and then be like, pacing the room back and forth and smoking. And I think that anxiety associated with that would put me into this state of like, oh my God, I have to be on my best behavior all the time. I can't have any fun. I can't be joyous. I can't smile. I can't laugh. I can't, do anything that might seem a little crazy, which is crazy because my father in and of himself is quite the thrill seeker. But it's just like, I can't do anything. Like, I'm just going to sit here and I'm just going to have him tell me what to do. And I'm going to listen, and I'm never going to push. I'm never going to make him feel uncomfortable. And so I really learned how to cap myself and hold myself back when I was around him. And of course, as I got older, it became increasingly difficult, especially like in going into my teenage years. And that's, I say 14 because that was, there was something that happened, which I'll share with you, that was quite a pivotal moment for me. And I realized, I think within myself, even though I was saddened by it, I realized this man can't continue to take and be such an important role in my life. He can't, because if he does continue to be, I knew he would have a greater effect than he was already. So I remembered at the time that I was 14, my older brother was in the military, and my dad, I kind of felt like he really didn't even care to see me anymore. He was just doing it because he was just fulfilling it as part of his court, order, when my parents decided custody. And honestly, it came down to, I think around the age of 12, I no longer really went with my dad for the weekends because my brother was 18 at that time and it was just kind of silly. So my father then dropped down really only to either scheduling something with a few hours on either Saturday or Sunday. And most of the time, basically, what it had become by the time my brother had joined the military and left, it was just my dad coming and picking me up at 10 o'clock on a Sunday morning, and we would go and grab breakfast. And he would have me till like noon, and that was it. But I remember sitting down one morning and having breakfast with my father. And, I was 14. I believe I may have been a little bit, no, I think I was about 14. One of my friends had just returned from Florida. And while she was there, she had swam with manatees and she had adopted a manatee. And again, let's just remember, like, I'm 14 and this is in 1994. So let's keep things in perspective. So, she had just come back and she was telling me about all of this. And I have always loved the ocean. I've always loved like dolphins. I remember I did, my my public speaking report in 8th grade on the bottlenose dolphin. It kicked ass. That's why I'm here now. No, I'm just kidding. But seriously, like I loved the idea. I loved the idea of not only adopting I don't know about a manatee, but just adopting a sea mammal and, helping it give it a good life. But anyway, I'm sitting down and I'm having breakfast with my father and I'm telling him this and I'm telling him how I think that I'm going to take some of my savings, which was very little, and put it towards this idea. And that I thought I kind of expressed to him, I'm like, maybe knowing me, I was probably like, maybe I'll be a marine biologist. And I remembered the look that he gave me in that instance when I go from talking about, giving money to an organization that basically helps marine life to being a marine biologist. And that was when I knew my dad could no longer be in my life in the way that he had been previously. And I knew that he was not going to be the man that was going to support me in what it is that I wanted to do. It was like, it was so crazy because in that moment, I remember completely keeping it together. This is what baffles me, by the way, is like just looking back at my childhood. And of course, there were other factors that played into me becoming that person that keeps it together. But holy shit, like I kept it together. He basically he looked at me and he just basically started telling me that it was a stupid idea. How could I want to spend my money that way? Why would I spend my money that way? It was such a waste. Going to school for marine biology. What does that even mean? What does that even look like? How am I going to make money? So then I'm just going to be at sea for years at a time. It was literally, he just pummeled every single negative comment that you could possibly think of in pertaining to both. And he just, basically just took my whatever dream I had at that moment and just destroyed it into 1,000 different pieces. And I kept it together, finished my meal, let him basically do what he needed to do in terms of communicating all of this to me. I'm sure that I just shut down. I remember doing that a lot with my dad, like just feeling like I'm not going to fight you over this because it would just really upset me. So I'm just going to sit here and I'm just going to take it. And then we're going to finish our meal and you're going to take me home. And that's basically what happened. And I remember just feeling like at that point, I was like, yeah, this man is not going to be supportive and he's not going to play a primary role in my life. And it was really sad for a while. I still continued to see him right up until I was Um, I would say pretty steadily until I was 16, and then things became, more scattered from 16 to 18. And yeah, it was just, my father was always kind of emotionally detached. So it was fine. I guess like it was just kind of like a natural progression of him as a father. And don't misunderstand me. I understand, like, I know my father's issues from when he was a child. And I have compassion for him, and I have forgiven him for not necessarily being there for me, but it definitely impacted me a great deal. And part of me looks back at that 14-year-old and the thoughts that I had around the fact that I knew at that moment that I had to protect myself from my father. However, I have these conflicting things. For one, I was proud of myself. I'm actually proud of myself that I was 14 and knew that my dad wasn't going to be the person that he should have been, and that I did start pulling away from him. Um, but it's also extremely sad. Uh, and also, I think the ways in which I thought that I was protecting myself really ended up kind of backfiring, not with him, but just with my consciousness moving forward. So, just, moving forward, my father and I, ever since after I was 18, I remembered we kind of got into an argument once because I had asked him if he could help me with college, just a little bit, not a lot, and basically just kind of meet my mom. And I did this in a letter because I didn't feel comfortable talking to him in person about it. And I had my older brother and a couple of other of my family members read the letter at that time and just make sure that like there was no tone, there was no like there was nothing in it that could have possibly like thrown him off. But anyway, I did all this, and unfortunately, he called me and just yelled and screamed at me on the phone, telling me that he wasn't going to do that, that he's been paying child support for blah, 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 like so many years and whatever. So after that, that was kind of like the final nail in the coffin with my dad. I've seen him very sporadically since, and yeah, I don't even know. So, but when I reflect back on some things and the way that I kind of had to be around my dad, obviously it deeply affected with just his absence and the way that he was around me. Um, Number one, it affects your self esteem. It affects your self esteem by one, you believing that you don't deserve to have somebody who's present with you. You don't deserve to have somebody even be interested in you, even interested in spending time with you. And the sad thing is even though my father may have been interested in spending time with me from the point that I was 2 years old, even if he had that genuine interest, in which I don't know if he did, maybe he did, um, there wasn't a lot of support back then for dads, single dads, newly divorced dads. And that made things more complicated, especially because, I'm of the opposite sex. So, like, I do remember one instance in which, I had to use the restroom and I was like 5 years old. And so my dad literally had to send me sometimes. Either I went in with him and my brother and he just kept his hands over my eyes going into the men's room, or he would send me into the women's room alone. So there was like things like that, of course, where I'm sure that he felt that he wasn't supported. But, in addition to that, it's just, I think more or less, and how it affected me is it just made me feel like I, really wasn't deserving of somebody who was like somebody who was actually interested in me, and, or somebody that was even available. Cause, let's not even take into the fact whether or not my father was physically available, right? Because, well, my mom and him were divorced, and the court kind of, they basically split the custody the way that they felt was the best way. And so it doesn't even matter if my father was physically unavailable. He also was emotionally unavailable. So there was like no bonding between me and my dad. Like very, very little. Like I said, the minute that we started having fun was when he would put up a wall. And so I was never able to get close to him. So then, of course, you can imagine as I got older, the types of like male relationships or just relationships that I had with males. I, specifically would choose people that were unavailable, not only physically, meaning that not only did they have a lot of things going on and very little time for a relationship, but they also were emotionally shut down or challenged in the way that they couldn't necessarily connect with another person. And whether that was because they had anxiety or they just never learned how, that's basically what it was. And so it's really quite interesting. But then also taking into account the fact that I felt like I was too much for my dad, that I basically kind of feel like everything natural about myself, I just denied. And it's really interesting because there were other things, other experiences that played into the more dumbing down of that through my childhood, that unfortunately kind of cemented those beliefs. But but yeah, that was a big one. I think just feeling like that men couldn't accept me in my fullness. And I think as women, we we really desire that, I think as women, our feminine energy, our true feminine energy is so mammoth, right? Like it's not only like the depth of it is there, but it's also just like extremely varied. And I think because women have such a huge capacity, and I'm not saying that men don't, but it's just not natural for men. Men have their own strengths. But women, I feel we have such a very deep capacity to feel and to act on those feelings. And and so it doesn't matter like what we're feeling. It doesn't matter if we're feeling elatedness or if we're feeling extreme empathy for another person. It's that we kind of just have this wide range. And I just I just felt like that there would be nobody that would be able to absorb that. And not that like there should be necessarily, but I think like the beautiful thing about femininity is that it is so wild and it's so full and it's so varied and it's so just like it's like literally like just blowing constantly, just like moving. It's life, right? It's literally like a dance. Femininity is just so it's life. It's it's not the consciousness, it's actually the consciousness moving through something. And so I know that like that's a lot to take from my father, like being so rigid, but I think that, in various ways, and obviously multiple factors played into this, but I think in a lot of ways, I never felt like I could fully be my feminine self around a male. I felt that I always had to be in control, that I always had to be in charge. I had to have, all my I's dotted, all my T's crossed. I had to know what I was doing. I had to walk into Lowe's and know where that fucking lumber section was and what I was going for. I had to be the boss. And I know so many of us women, with juggling our jobs, And just bringing, I think what's so interesting to me is I've learned how much managing businesses requires me to be in my masculine energy. Totally fine. We all have both. Okay. We all have both. Men and women both have masculine and feminine energy within us. But the problem is that when we sit in one energy too much, especially if we tend to be of the opposite gender, and I'm using the term gender rather loosely, but it's like it can be quite polarizing and it can create honestly a lot of tension in our bodies and a lot of opposing thoughts and belief systems. And so I've always found that it's really good for me to be able to be in my feminine energy when I'm around men or when I'm in a relationship, because it helps kind of balance me. Because when I'm doing my business and I'm going about my day and I'm ticking things off the to-do list and I'm managing shit like a boss, like that's the energy that I need to be in. But then on the flip side, at the end of the day, if I continue to stay in that masculine energy, if, my person walks in the door and I'm like, this is what we're having, if I'm super directive, super decisive, super like, this is what we're having to eat, this is what we're going to do for the rest of the night, chop, 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 it really, it ruins me. Long term, it ruins me. And so I've noticed that doesn't serve me. And I've been that in relationships. And so I think really moving over and understanding, okay, at the end of the day, I have to move over into my feminine and I have to let my partners know that I enjoy them stepping up and making decisions. I think that is the beautiful providing supportive quality of the masculine, is that for them, it is a natural state for them to be in. And so it doesn't feel like heavy lifting, where for most women that sit in their feminine energy, it feels like being in their masculine energy it's a lot of heavy lifting. So I hope that I haven't gotten too off track there with talking about masculine and feminine energies a little bit, but it's something that I have noticed. I kind of joke sometimes that I used to be a man in my previous life because I feel that my childhood was so rooted in masculine energy, with me just taking control and manning things. And don't misunderstand me. I know that other factors, play into that. I know that being raised by a single mother is going to certainly teach me that, as well as, if we look at the stars, I am an Aries, and Aries is typically masculine energy. But regardless, I never felt like my father could accept me in my childhood and in my beautiful, joyful, outgoing, adventurous, spontaneous nature. And he was always trying to cap that. And so I always believed that was something that I had to tone down. That was something that I had to keep quiet. That was something that I could only be in other in female in the company of females. So yeah, being too much was something that, yeah, I really didn't quite realize until right now. That I know that a lot of other children feel that way. Typically when they have parents that are not available to them, right? Because you're being neglected so much, or you're being neglected so much. I mean, maybe you were neglected so much, but you're being neglected, so you believe that you already are too much. Because clearly, if you weren't, you wouldn't have been neglected. You wouldn't have been left alone. It wouldn't have been too much for your parents to handle. So there's that aspect. The other aspect in which it really kind of affected me is not having that protective. I didn't learn. I didn't learn to be protective of myself. I did in the way that it was my father that taught me that I need to protect myself from him, but I didn't really understand what that meant in terms of my energy, in terms of my time, in terms of my love. And what was really interesting is I feel because my father wasn't available to me, that I actually became, my standards were low. I became far more accepting of the little that men could give me rather than me sit there and say, oh, men can give me a lot. Um, and I'm going to weed through and I'm going to make sure that I am protective of my energy and things like that, and make sure that I find somebody who is willing to give to me, who is willing to free up time for me. And it's kind of weird. I think that he taught me to protect myself from him, but it was almost like it wasn't the right thing that I needed to learn. I think most daughters that have good relationships with their fathers, they learn that their father is protective of them and that their father has standards set for them, that their father wants them to be with certain types of men, that their father wants them to do well in school or whatnot. And so in some ways, I believe that we as daughters, we learn how to be protective of our time and our energy. And the way in which that usually carries out is through our career and where we choose to, do with that, and also with in terms to relationships. I would say relationships almost stronger, only because obviously more women are working, and so mothers can kind of teach that too. But I feel that the father typically has that. And I'm not saying mothers don't have that protective instinct. They absolutely do. It's just like in a different way. I feel that mothers tend to be more nurturing, where fathers tend to be more direct. Uh, and, they usually do that by like, no, I'm sorry, Kimberly, you're not going out with this person. They don't meet my standards, therefore they don't meet yours, and we're not doing this. And, of course, children rebel and all of that. But that's where I kind of feel like I had to learn that on my own. I really had to revamp my self-esteem. I had to believe that I was enough, that I am enough because I am here, and God wouldn't bother making me if I wasn't enough, plain and simple. I'm deserving of time, love, and attention. I'm deserving of someone who honestly is going to be protective of me. Not just me be protective of them, but them be protective of me. And that was really difficult because I grew up, learning that I was very good at being protective of other people, but not so much myself. But I had to start saying those things to me, and to myself, and I really had to uh, understand that just because other people lacked certain capability to exhibit those things to others, or, I just think it just continues, right? I mean, the lessons that my dad didn't learn, he basically taught me. And so it's up to us individually to stop those patterns and to start believing that we are enough and that we're deserving. And so, what I want to kind of move into talking about from there, because I could go on and on and on over the ways in which this kind of affects your self esteem, but those to me are kind of like the biggest ones. And I believe inherently a lot of us experience neglect on varying levels. But the next thing that I kind of want to go into is, you know, when we don't have standards for ourselves and we don't believe that we are enough, we tend to gravitate towards people that just reflect that in us, right? Which I already previously stated. But then what happens when we actually do firmly believe that we are enough and we start to attract that into our lives? And this is where things can get a little tricky, because so many people come to me and they're like, hey, so you won't believe what I'm experiencing right now. My life is totally starting to reflect back to me all of the belief systems that I have put in place to overcome the previous belief systems. And I firmly 100% believe that I am enough, and I'm starting to see it. I'm starting to, see it in my career. I'm starting to see it in where I'm living. Like, I'm I'm literally getting opportunities that reflect back to me that I'm valuable. And I'm starting to get money that proves to me that I am valuable. So clearly it's working, but I keep finding myself self sabotaging. And oh man, it's so funny because I found myself in this place so many times. Basically, to me, we self sabotage a lot more than we think that we do. To me, almost when we're not in the present moment, we're self sabotaging. Because at any time that you are not here, that you are not in the present moment, you are essentially closing down your possibilities to a very, very narrow scope. So, whether or not you're self sabotaging because of something that you have previously learned about yourself, and that's coming up for you, or whether you're self sabotaging because you're narrowing your scope of possibility, it is still one and the same. So, let me give you an example. The most common example that I feel that people stumble across all the time is when they get into a new relationship and they see this person. They take their time, which I always strongly advise. They take their time getting to know the person, and they're like, man, this person is amazing. They're generous. They're, thoughtful. They always make time for me. This is healing. This is so incredibly healing. I know that I'm a valuable person and that I'm fun and that I'm that I'm fun, that I'm spontaneous, that I'm adventurous, and that I am loving and caring, and that I deserve somebody that is going to reflect that and make time for me. But what we kind of can start to do is a lot of people get hung up when they start to see the smallest little thing that might remind them of something that has happened before. Okay. And I mean, I have done this so many times, and I'm telling you right now, it is very hard to stop that train. It just is. I think that obviously the bigger the wound, the bigger the train. And so you're like choo choo, you just hop on the front, and you're the conductor, and you're just like, oh yeah, no, we're taking this train to self-sabotage town. This is happening right now. You're reminding me too much of something that I experienced in my past. And now I'm afraid that this is going to fail because of that. And we do it all the time. And so whether or not we do it with relationships, whether we do it with career, whether we do it with money, whether we do it with whatever, it doesn't matter. We always have to align. It takes a while. And I always tell people, try to have compassion for yourself, because it takes a while for us not only to change our belief systems into believing that we are a whole, perfect human being and that we are valuable and we are worthy of time, attention, and love. Not only does that take time, it also takes time believing, and it also takes time to get that reflected back to you. And then in addition, to not fuck it up. Because that's the problem, is that usually we get so far and then we fuck it up. And this is where sometimes multiple tries are what is required. Sometimes you have to self-sabotage yourself on several relationships before you finally are just like, no, fuck, this person is doing something so small that is reminding me of my mother, my father, something else that happened that traumatized me when I was young, or something that has happened in a previous relationship that didn't work out. It happens. But that doesn't, but you not staying in the present moment and you reaching for that past and bringing that past forward and spilling it out all over the, dinner table to this person. Not that you shouldn't be in communication and talking to this person about maybe your feelings. But what I'm saying is you doing that is separating you from the present moment. And there's a whole new, when you're firmly planted in that space of I'm deserving, this doesn't have to end how that ended, that this doesn't have to go how that went. When you stand in that present moment and you can stand firmly in that, the possibilities are they're endless. it's not going to be the same situation. And I know many times, even if we've had similar situations, we still have learned a little bit, we take forward into a different situation. Might be kind of the same, might be a little bit different, but we take it forward and we're like, okay, I learned this from the past, so now I don't need to react the past, which is exactly that, reacting the past. So, yeah, just something that I have recently noticed is, just all the ways in which self sabotage comes up for me and feeling. I'll give one very, very recently. I have started an organization and it's called the Hug Clinic. You can look it up if you want. Um, but anyway, I held an event this past weekend and it's been difficult. Sometimes within my career, I feel like I'm not supported. And I know I mean, I know, I know we could all feel that way. But for me specifically, I can give various credit to the artist mentality, not really having extremely present parents when I was young, having relationships with people who didn't necessarily believe in me or thought that I was crazy for ideas that I came up with that I wanted to execute. And also, I just kind of am really bad at telling people how important it is that they show up for me. And so I had an event this past weekend, but going into it, I just did not feel supported. I didn't feel, I was doubting myself. Honestly, if I'm to be honest, I was literally praying that nobody showed up because then what? I was literally praying that nobody was going to show up and that it was going to be a complete failure. And I literally saw me doing this. And the reason why I did it is because I was scared of actually making an impact or scared that I would then have to level up even more. Right? Because we get to the point where we're like, okay, I'm deserving of this. Like, I think that I'm kind of deserving of this. I want this. So where I would have to say is I'm wanting the support, but there must be something deep down inside of me that still doesn't believe that I'm worthy of it. That I'm worthy of support in being an artist, that I'm worthy in support of being, a person that organizes events that involve lots of hugging. That I'm worthy of being seen and heard and appreciated. And I know that obviously that most of that is rooted in what I know, right? What I know and what I've shown to be true. What has been shown to be true to me. But that's not true. It's not true because those instances in which I was shown that was by people that they were not shown that. So it's just a cycle. But I self-sabotaged. I knew going in, I wasn't putting forth as much effort to make sure that people showed up. I wasn't thinking positively. I was just like, please God, don't. I think at first, I was like, I haven't done as much work as I needed to do. And I think that when we start there, there's a disconnect there. There's a belief system there. And that is that work is in direct relevance to how successful we are. And that is not the case. And so, I think starting there was just not helpful because I'm already self-sabotaging with a negative thought. And then I was just worried, okay, if people legit show up, am I prepared? Am I going to be what they think that they're coming? Am I going to be what they expect me to be? Am I going to be able to pull this off? Am I really in a place where I can support them fully? Am I ready to receive criticism? Am I ready to be denied? And the truth is apparently I wasn't. Because in some ways, I am still feeling like I'm too much or that I'm not enough. And so it happens. It happens all the time, um, in many, many different ways. And so I guess like if there's one thing that I want to just leave here on the table is that fathers and mothers are extremely important in our lives. And that I wish that, and my hope, and what I will continue to manifest moving forward, is that we really start to bring the focus back to the nuclear family. We stop devaluing the importance of men, and we start supporting women in being in the workspace and also a parent, because I feel that that's where we're lacking. And I do intend to do a future episode about that. The other thing that I would like to say is that healing takes time. None of us are walking around scot-free. We all have experienced tragic things, traumatic things, and they are on all different ranges, all different scales. And all of us should just hold compassion and understanding for every single person, because we are all up against our own challenges. But I am going to tell you that regardless of what your dad did or didn't do, you are enough. You are here. You wouldn't be here if you weren't. And I could even joke and say that you wouldn't be human. You might be like a tree, but that's not true, because a tree has just as much importance as we do. But you are enough. And I hope that you can find resources that not only teach you and teach you more about why you're enough and solidify that belief in you, but eventually reflect back to you that very truth, and that you can move forward and see your sabotaging, see the ways in which you deny yourself the very thing that you are. Because if anything, yes, we can all self-sabotage ourselves all the time. But are we aware of it? And moving forward, can we make the changes to prevent that from happening again? And I believe that I can. I know the next event moving forward, that I will definitely put in more effort. And the irony is even though I self-sabotaged in a lot of ways, it was still very successful. So that's where the beauty comes in, that we are co-creators. And that even when we fail, that there is something else working in our favor. Most of the time, we just honestly, like, if we just let that thing work in our favor the majority of the time and we just got out of the way, we would succeed. So just something to leave you guys with. I know that I kind of went from the importance of fathers and my experience with my dad to self-esteem issues and then to self-sabotage, but it's all connected, right? All right, you guys, I'm going to leave you there. Thank you so much again for listening. And as always, if you have any questions, comments, or topics that you want me to discuss in the future, please feel free to drop me a line at connectedpodcast.us@gmail.com. Thanks again. Stay connected.